Aprovechamos este momento para reiterar nuestro agradecimiento a las compañías que patrocinan este evento. Gracias por vincularse a este congreso, su respaldo ha sido fundamental para su ejecución. Seguimos hablando de sostenibilidad, ahora en el panel Sostenibilidad y Mercado de Capitales, la visión de los inversionistas, las bancas de desarrollo y los aliados del ecosistema. Participan Diego Stapff, director del fondo LaGreen, gestionado por Finance in Motion, y Nabil Kadri, director general de Medio Ambiente en el Banco Nacional de Desarrollo Económico y Social de Brasil, BNDES. El panel será moderado por Mundy, así que les damos la bienvenida nuevamente a todos ustedes. Vale recordar que al final de este panel habrá una ronda de preguntas para que pues estén todos muy atentos a este contenido y las puedan realizar.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I'm so sorry, it's me again. It's awful. I've stood before you before lunch, feeling it's rather like watching a female buffalo looking at its calf. You know you're standing in great danger, standing between such an audience and lunch. And now, after lunch, we have the challenge of keeping you all awake. So luckily for you, it's not just me depressing you. I have two other friends and colleagues who may depress you even further, which is wonderful. What I'm hoping, though, is that rather than giving another recitation of gloom and misery, which I could do happily for now, what I was hoping we might do is to concentrate not on the problems and not why we can't do things, but actually what the solutions are and how we can do things. And also, if you will forgive me, ladies and gentlemen, what I was hoping to do, just in case the energy levels drop and you feel a small siesta coming on, what I'd love to is to open it up and for you to ask questions and to comment and be part of the discussions as well. Hopefully not throwing things at us, but actually just other than questions. So that'd be lovely. So what I'd like to do, I was given kindly a fantastically long list of questions to ask, and I've taken the brave decision not to look at it at all. So what I thought we'd actually do here is have a conversation, and just to play it by ear, see how it goes, see where we get to. Your contributions, please, will be fantastically welcome as well. If you all fall asleep, we promise to leave quietly without disturbing you as we go. So, ladies and gentlemen, what I'd like to start with Nabil, who has an astonishingly important portfolio at BNDES, the largest development bank in the world, puts out more money than the World Bank millisecond by millisecond, operating in a complex environment, faced with some challenges, one might say. And Nabil, in the enormously inspirational, cheering discussion or lecture I gave before lunch, I was talking about some of the problems, one of which is how to go to scale quickly. And we have had many conversations here about how we need to grow the market. And I was wondering if you could just talk briefly about where you see as being, from your own experience, some of the key challenges, if you wish, but actually the key solutions that you feel can go to scale.
Justin and all, es un placer de estar acá con vosotros. Voy a hablar en inglés para Justin comprender, pero quiero agradecer la invitación por Nicolás, por estar acá hoy en Cartagena con usted. Justin, I will turn back to English because I think it's better for you to continue our dialogue. Yes, it is a very interesting question, the challenges to and opportunities to scale up the sustainable investments. Brazil is so huge, and the size and the complexity, but we have a very interesting, similar thing with Colombia. We are multi-diverse or mega-diverse. We are diverse in biodiversity, culturally, in the terms of territories. We have a lot of diversity. But we have a lot of things similar to the inequalities. So we are countries that have many inequalities, racial inequalities, gender inequalities, income inequalities. And once we talk on climate and sustainability and how to scale up the investments, what we try to do, Justin, is looking for what we are aiming to change, what the real purpose of our investment, and then trying to find the best financial instruments to change that reality. So at the first time, I can say that we choose the challenges that we want to move from, and how we will do it using resources, but not only resources. How do we use our all the network that we have with companies, the network that we have with the public policy, with the government, to make the field better for the investment to succeed? Because most of the time it's not a matter of the price of the money and not a matter of the amount of the money, but it's the matter of if this investment or these resources will really make the change that we want. So how to do it better and in a scale? First of all, be very transparent. Know and communicate well what we are aiming to do. And most of the time, it comes with a good framework. With a framework and saying very directly what we do not do. So I will not finance this and that and this and that. And what we want to change. Doing the right KPIs, putting it in a transparent way, and trying to move the actors in the field to that direction. So it's in that sense that we try to have scale in a very big and diverse country. Not only looking for each project, as we told during the lunch, we have in Brazil, here in Colombia, very nice and good pilots, very good, very beautiful operations that you look and say, oh, how creative we were doing this. But most of the time, this very creative solution is one and only, without replication, without scale. So how to go not only looking for projects, but looking for programs, as I said. And to move from project to program, we need to have a good framework, good transparency, and a very structural way to monitor and evaluate the results of what we are doing. So I think to begin our conversation, these are some principles that we try to follow to have this challenge of scale and sustainability.
Thank you so much, Nabil. So a framework, transparency, good governance being the sort of the three key things. But then, Diego, as we've discussed as well, I mean, given the really interesting work that Finance in Motion does around the world, but also here in Latin America, some of the issues that we've discussed have been how is it possible to move into this green sector where you have an indistinct set of policies, perhaps, which are not necessarily standardized, with a very high upfront cost of capital and being first in the system. As we know, in Germany, what changed the renewable energy system journey was a fixed tariff, which actually gave a degree of certainty and a floor price so people could then go forward with confidence. We have a number of problems in some of these sectors, which is, A, we have to change behavior, but also we're dealing with quite small projects, as Nabil has said, which need to be scaled up, but also a risk context which automatically requires or denotes a high cost of capital. So in terms of blended finance and the use of technical assistance, use of funded first loss or guarantees. How essential do you think those are? And do you think we have a constraint of the amount of guarantees and funded first loss? Do we need more? And can we operate without it?
Thank you, Justin. I think the role of blended finance in making sure that is, or achieving that is enough funding channel to this type of projects is essential. Because neither the private sector has enough funding for doing this, and they have the constraints, the risks, the requirements that for which they need to work together with the public sector to overcome, but also the public sector doesn't have enough. Will be also interesting to hear from a co-panelist. If BNDES, you say, is the biggest development bank in the world, but I would assume not even BNDES has enough resources in its own to cover the needs for green finance in Brazil. So leveraging partnerships is essential, and blended finance is a great way to do that. In a fund like LaGreen, we leverage partnerships in several ways. The fund was created with just 100 million. It's a big number, but if you consider that we are addressing the whole continent, it's not so much. It's 100 million from the European Union and the German government. And the reason why they put these resources into an investment fund instead of doing this alone is because they understood that they cannot do this alone. They might generate a couple of nice stories, nice pictures, but it's not going to be ever enough to solve the problem. This initial capital is meant to be leveraged within the fund. So the fund LaGreen is mobilizing private sector money from Europe, from the US, to reach a more significant size. And the first loss protection from the public sector is what encourages them to do that through the fund. Even those two combined, the private sector and the public sector within LaGreen, will also not be enough. So also ourselves, we need to look for partnerships. We need to look for co-investors to have a second level of leverage and achieve even higher scales. We support issuance of thematic bonds in the region in two ways. One is the traditional one, serving as an anchor investor. So it's a fund that can commit to support an issuer 1 year before and wait for that year for the bond to be structured and to see the market. But we can also provide technical assistance. So help the issuer with training, with consulting, with certifications, with everything is needed to produce that thematic bond. And we are happy if we provide technical assistance to a bond, and then the bond is issued without our funding. Because that means we are mobilizing even more resources from the private sector, and we are not blocking hours for that. We can use them for the next one. So definitely leveraging partnerships is essential. And the memorandum of understanding, which has signed with the Colombia Stock Exchange, is an honor for us because we are still at an early stage. LaGreen is still an idea, still a promise, and we are very grateful for the trust that the Colombian Stock Exchange places on us, because these are the type of partnerships we need to reach the scale that is required.
Thank you, Diego, very much. And then if you take this idea of partnerships, Nabil, because we have this interesting capital stack so often with public and private sector, institutional investors, venture capitalists, all who have very different risk appetites, and particularly the fixed income markets. We were talking earlier about the role of the TCFD, Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. And you were mentioning that in Brazil, this is now, I think, mandatory, you were suggesting, or saying. And I was wondering how you see that as being a helpful step forward to provide a coherent reference point for some of the identifications of risk, which therefore can lower the cost of capital, which can therefore make the success of blended finance more secure. Do you see the TCFD as being now really needing to be mandatory across all countries as we go forward? It's certainly, that is the intention. France has it in its Section 173 of its energy bill. Other countries are following. Do you feel here in the region this is likely, and would that be helpful, do you think?
Justin and all, you know, in Brazil, we had a very active regulator on sustainable agenda. And it's very interesting because it is historically like this. I suppose why it happened there, because we did the Rio 92 in 1992. It was the biggest conference on climate, biodiversity, and the relation between humans and nature. And since then, since 92 and late 80s, all the environmental and sustainable agenda was in the heart of every discussion, decision, and public policy agenda since the 90s. So many things that we are talking now as something really new or something really innovative, sometimes you look back and then we tried something similar. And if you take our law, our environmental law, there is an article there, it is from the 90s, that says that every financial institution is co-responsible environmentally and climately with the enterprises and projects that we finance. So this is by law from the last 3 decades. Since then, our central bank always tried to do the first step. And it's very interesting. Why? Because most of the time, once the regulators say this is for everyone for the same time, we neutralize all the problems related to competition between the institutions. Because most of the time, I will adopt the CFD on my own. Okay, I will go there, put all the risks, put on my report, I will show off all the information. And we know that not everybody value it. Some will value in a good way, some will not value it in a positive way. So once the regulators say everybody need to have the same base, you neutralize this negative competition. And all the things that you work is on that base. And it helps us trying to work more on the positive agenda. Because the risk agenda, the TCFD, TNFD agenda is by law. Okay, so what I can do more? So you, when I say you, is we, our institutions, financial institutions, we use our time to differentiate one on other. We differentiate positively. What I am doing to explore better the opportunities of biodiversity, what I'm doing better to make the transition for a low carbon economy, what I'm doing for adaptation, because the basis is the same for everybody on the regulation. So we differentiate our work on the positive way. I think this is interesting when you put it as the same for everybody in the same country, because you put I can say, the most heavy agenda that is related to risks, to what I'm doing to mitigate these risks at the same level. So you can differentiate better on the competitive way, on the new projects, new programs, new positive agendas that you're launching.
That's really interesting. So a common framework provides a level playing field, which is extremely useful. But then, in terms of the risk, I was wondering, we were talking to Nicola last night about what this amazing integrated exchange is going to be doing in terms of equity, derivatives, and fixed income. And in terms of fixed income, for some years I ran something for the Prince of Wales called the P8, which was a group of pension funds. We ended up with the P80, I think. We had a lot of pension funds around the world. And it was a rather depressing experience to some extent, because the pension funds tended to say, this is, I have to say this is 15 years ago, so things have slightly changed for the better. But the institutional investors, the pension funds, were saying, yeah, cool, we're quite interested in this sort of green space, but our fiduciary responsibility means we can only put a small amount of our risk capital to play. And that was a very small amount of the total capital which could be deployed. And then the question was, okay, we might, as pension funds, institutional investors, be more interested if you had a vanilla bond which we could then invest into. And so some of us went away and we came up with the green bond market, and then a few years later, I and Jean-Paul Adam, who was then the Minister of Finance in the Seychelles, we came up with the first blue bond, not the debt spot, which TNC did, but actually the blue sovereign bond of the Seychelles. And the purpose of those in the green bond market is now 4 trillion. It's great, but it still hasn't really reached the scale that we need. And there is this discussion between use of proceeds and KPIs. But for the institutional, for the fixed income part of the spectrum, FIM has a fantastic, Financial Motion has a fantastic reputation in thematic bonds, and LaGreen is specializing in that. Where do you see the initial constraints in these thematic bonds, and how do you think we can turn that on its head to make it a positive and universal process where almost all bonds are thematic or green? Is this something which you see on the horizon here to make poor Nicholas's life a complete misery in 10 years' time?
Yeah, let me structure my answer. It is the mission of LaGreen to promote the development of the thematic bond market in the region. And we look at the individual components of a market one by one. So it's the supply, demand, and the pricing. In the Latin America, the market is small and is incipient worldwide, not just here, also in Germany, in Canada. I think in terms of the capacity of producing more green bonds, Latin America is comparatively well positioned. We have, for example, very good local service providers. So when you are structuring a green bond, you can have consultants, advisors, certifiers from Brazil, like NINT from Mercintawi. You have PRS from Peru. These are very high quality supporters from the region. You have more and more sector players that are aware of the importance of these instruments, are willing to support you, being banking associations, stock exchanges, even the regulator. I'm not saying that is enough. I'm just saying the capacity to produce the assets is there. And the underlyings are also there with strong potential to do more. We saw the thematic bond industry in Latin America starting first with a focus on the sovereign, then moving to local development banks, followed by the largest banks and other financial institutions in each country, and now reaching more and more corporates and projects. So it is deepening. And also in terms of the topic, so what kind of projects is being supported? It used to be energy, transportation, housing, energy efficiency, etc. Now, this year, for example, we see many bonds in the blue area, for example, in water and water sanitation, which is also an important challenge. So on the supply side, there is a lot to do, but I think the capacity to produce those assets is good, comparatively good. To ensure the quality of those assets that are produced, I think leaving that up completely to the market is not advisable. You see that in Europe, for example, for many, many years, it's just relying on the ICMA standards and the CBI certification, which is a market solution. More and more, the regulator is making sure that quality is there, that you don't sell something as green that is not green, so that you don't distract the market from that. So you have the EU taxonomy, SFDR, and the European Union is also working on the green bond standard, which is delayed, trying more and more to make sure that we speak the same language, that we have at least common minimum standards, etc. Demand is also important, so who is going to buy these green bonds that we produced? I have the idea that given those increasing requirements on what do you call green, and how much do you have to invest in those green assets if you want to call green yourself in Europe, there is a great opportunity for Latin America to mobilize international long-term funding to good green assets, financial assets from the region. There is, for example, under SFDR, the requirements for investment funds to classify themselves. So if you call yourself and if you market yourself as an ESG fund, you're the so-called Article 8, and then there are certain requirements you must fulfill in terms of reporting, internal controls, procedures, etc. If you don't do that, you cannot call you an ESG fund anymore. Otherwise, you're breaching regulation. And if you want to go one step further and call yourself an impact fund, so if you want to say, I'm not just not doing harm, I'm doing good, then you're an Article 9 fund, and then requirements are even stricter. And what we saw when SFDR became active is that initially there was a significant number of funds classifying themselves under Article 9. When they saw what the requirements mean in practice, they went down to Article 8. Very, very few funds stayed in the Article 9 category of funds that are allowed to call themselves impact funds. This is for me also a proof that when the regulator in Europe starts controlling who is calling themselves green and fighting greenwashing, quickly we will find that it is a scarcity of green assets in Western Europe, in the USA. And if in Latin America we can produce those assets, and if we can connect our markets to them so that they can serve that need, then the demand for these green assets can be huge.
That is really interesting. And if I may be allowed to doff one of the hats I wear, I chair a small asset management company doing regenerative forestry and agriculture around the world. It's very high impact, it's over Article 9, but the conversation we have with investors can be quite interesting, because it's usually that we as an investor very much like what you're doing is green, it's great for biodiversity, fantastic social stuff, blah, blah. And by the way, the management fee is the same in performance fee, and times are hard, so actually, don't expect to be too generously rewarded. But actually, if one's going to do the really hard work in ensuring social sustainability, proper environmental monitoring, proper looking at biodiversity, proper reporting, and the reporting is a lot. I mean, it's a lot of reporting and a lot of verification. This is not done cheaply, if done well. It's not easy to do. And there's a sort of slightly oxymoronic process whereby, and not just us, but for many of the companies who are really trying to do the best they can to the highest possible standards, the system is now quite rightly so stringent that it actually significantly diminishes those companies' ability to make a profit, to be able to afford to do what they want to do. Because the expectations of the investors tends to be, well, marvelous, we will borrow your green halo, but don't expect you to be rewarded for doing it because it's great that you're doing it. So we want the same return, you take the extra cost. And that is going to become, I think, quite a problem, because as these environmental conditions become more complicated, as I explained before lunch, the measures we have to take to improve the situation are themselves going to become more onerous, and that requires a cost. So there is going to be a trade-off between just how much money can be taken out of the system in order to get the results that we want. And these high-impact protocols are extremely important, and people do need to follow them, but people also need to understand that to avoid greenwashing, it comes at quite an expense. And so, ladies and gentlemen, we have 12 minutes and 3 seconds. I've got a huge clock in front of me, ticking away. Nobody has yet fallen asleep. Nobody's left, and I think everybody is still alive, which is good. Yes, signs of life. Marvelous, well done. So I can keep on doing a sort of, if you'll forgive the expression, Spanish Inquisition to poor Nabil and Diego here, but from now on, do feel free to jump up and down and dance and ask questions, and ask a question if you like. Otherwise, I shall just keep on terrorizing these poor, charming, lovely victims I've got up here. Nicholas has now got up and is walking, which is worrying.
Getting a microphone.
Ladies and gentlemen, so please wave the hand and we'll get you. Otherwise, Nabil, the question I wanted to ask you is, given that constraint, and what you see in Brazil with BNDES, do you see that the current risk-reward profile is adequate to enable people to go to the scale we need to go to, at the speed we need to go to answer the challenges which we've got coming? Without going into venture capital space, which is another kettle of fish, as we've said.
Yeah. As we heard in your speech before the lunch, Justin, we don't have time anymore to make the changes that we need. And it's very impressive what is happening now in Canada, for example, Hawaii, or in the south of Argentina. I think everybody is seeing what is happening. So we cannot ask these anymore, like, I will not do anything. So how can we move fast and with scale? And you said that the trade-off and the risk, what we really believe is that some changes really need to have a low cost of capital to make things happen more fast, I can say, because we know that do the same thing that we are used to do is the cheapest way to continue investing and increasing investments, because we already know the procedures, already know the clients, the sector. Do something in a new sector. Do something that needs different financial modeling. It's not only risky. It needs more work, more hours of work to learn better on how to do it, how to understand this new sector, how to understand the technologies. So to avoid this kind of decision not to innovate, doing things differently, we think that sometimes we need to put the cost of the interest rates for these specific technologies or sectors in a different perspective. We can do it in a different ways. For example, if we don't want to use interest rate, okay, I will not use interest rate because let's do it in a market way. Okay, we can do a linked loan or a linked bond and put differentiations on time, not price. Okay, I will not change the price, but I will give advantages on guarantees. I will give advantage on the time of the investment. I will give other advantages to make this direction to be the one to be followed for more enterprises or companies or individuals. So we have many different instruments as financial or capital markets that we can use, although we're using only the price. Most of the time when we talk on risk and return, we talk on price, but it's not a matter of price, just a matter of price. We can use different instruments to make the change. That's why I like the way that some companies or some investment banks work using the theory of change, not the theory of receiving more profit. So what I said in my first answer, what I want to change in the real world, what a positive impact that I want to make. This is the theory of change. Then I model, I make the financial architecture to make it possible. So once we work with missions, with this kind of goal, we need to change our procedures, our way of view, and instruments like linked bonds, linked loans, using KPIs, so on and so forth. We are trying to do it this way.
It's so lovely to hear BNDES saying that it's the theory of change and the impact, and also the willingness to share risk too, which is such a key thing. And it's wonderful to hear. Thank you very much. I'm scanning the audience here for brave soul that's putting up a hand. Otherwise, it's back to poor Diego. Oh, Nicholas, you have. Brave man.
working now? Yes. So you were mentioning in your speech, Justin, about the swaps between nature and debt for governments, and you mentioned some examples in the world, Gabon, if I understand well. I will ask Nabil your vision, because President Petro is very vocal on that side, in the sense that Colombia can make deals in that sense, it swaps nature and debt for an indebted country like ours. So Nabil, I would love to hear your vision on that. And for Diego, you mentioned that transparency is one key factor for international players to come into a market like Colombia. And for us, in the integration process that we are happily beginning, because it's just the beginning, it's very important to attract the international community to these markets. So what other factors can you bring into the discussion in order that we can achieve here in Colombia or Peru or Chile to attract more investors, the investor side to the local markets, and especially, of course, in the thematic bonds spectrum?
Should I go first?
I've got such a long answer, it's going to take up there, so after you.
Thanks, Nicolas. First, there are technical challenges, and I think the merger of the 3 stock exchanges is already great, because as an investor, when you establish your operational capacity and your infrastructure to invest in one market, it's not only Colombia anymore. Now you can participate in the 3 markets. And when you develop your skills, your expertise as a foreign investor to participate now, there is a much bigger universe to choose from. That's already great. It's always frustrating when issuers very quickly ask about the green. So can I issue my bond cheaper? This might not be the first effect of issuing a green bond, but it might be rather a benefit in terms of other aspects, like could be maturity, could be size, could be currency. But very importantly, still what you see is a demand that is more independent of cycles, because the asset is simply too scarce. And you see that already in the continent very, very regularly. Countries that just put the president in jail, and then 2 months later there is an oversubscribed thematic bond during that moment. We saw that in Ecuador, we saw that in Guatemala. We see that in very places. Like, demand is such for these instruments that is much more stable and less reactive to shocks and to cycles. And to your question, what international investors look for, it's basically information asymmetry. Are you providing the information that they need to do the due diligence, to do their own reporting? So it's for international investors looking for impact assets, it's not just about doing the due diligence to buy the assets, but also the regular reporting they need to do to the stakeholders about the impact that this asset is generating during duration. And there are standards, there are best practices out there. And there are external certifications. All this makes the life of an international investor easier. ICMA already gives part of the recipe. Have a solid, comprehensive, transparent framework. Give as much information as you can about the projects that you are going to finance with a green bond. Don't just say, I'm going to do renewable energies and sanitation. The more you can share with potential investors, the better. Certifications are always great that someone independent confirmed that. Disclosures about the ESG, you also don't want to invest in an impact asset. You want to make sure that the positive impact is not overwhelmed by eventual negative impacts as well. So investors need to evaluate, they need to report about how this is going to be mitigated by the company that issued the bond. And very important is a solid, credible promise about reporting during the time where the asset is going to be outstanding, which could be 5, could be even 10 years. People need to know how much CO2, how many cubic meters of water, etc., are being saved or treated or protected, because this is also part of their own commitments.
Thank you, Diego, and wonderfully, 1 minute, 20 seconds left to answer very complicated questions, Nicolas. So, very briefly, I think what President Petro is doing is great. He's supporting this review of debt debt options, which will take a year to go. To declare an interest, I think I'm on the expert panel to participate in that. But I also, for my sins, so old am I, that I actually worked on the first debt for nature swaps in the 1980s. And if you talk about a debt for nature swap with most creditor ministers of finance, they go all wobbly, and they don't like it very much because they want to talk about new debt issuance, not old debt restructuring. So the trick is to work out which part of the debtor stack is eligible for such a debt swap, and it's frequently, sometimes it's sovereign, a lot of times it's the private sector. The private sector debts, the creditor market is difficult because it's so fragmented, incredibly different amounts, different owners, changing all the time. So getting enough people to do it is a bit of a problem, and recently at Gabon, although things may have changed because of the coup a couple of days ago, that was a very good example of what could happen. Two things, if I may, from that. A, it's ensuring that you get value for money for the debt swap, because otherwise it becomes an expensive foreign exchange swap with no great benefit. So you need to ensure that the amount of time that is spent in doing the swap and the differential in the market rate is sufficiently deep to give that extra fiscal boost that's required from non-payment. Secondly, you also want to make sure that there's, well, three things therefore. Secondly, you want to make sure that actually the process of doing a debt swap doesn't affect the credit rating on the country. It should increase its resilience rather than decreasing it. But sometimes, given the Paris Club and common framework issues, that can be a bit of a problem. We need to ensure somehow that the common framework is actually a framework and is accessible and works. And that's a key concern. At the moment, it's doing none of those things. And there's a lot of effort through G20 to try and do that. Thirdly, I think the most important thing from an environmental point of view is that where these things work, they work because there is a management plan for the use of the proceeds that has integrity. And if you don't have that, what you're doing is in effect quite a sort of sexy, nice piece of financial engineering, but the benefits you're trying to attain don't exist. So you could take a hypothetical case of a debt swap for a focus on the blue economy. And the purpose of the debt swap is to ensure that there is a marine protected area. Once we have a marine protected area, you can ensure that there's no catch. If there's no catch, then you get a spillover effect because then the yield of the fish outside the marine protected area increases. Thereby you increase employment, you increase fiscal return. If, however, what you've done is to do a debt swap and there's no management plan and the fishing continues in the marine protected area, then, and you don't change the policy environment in which that takes place, all you've managed to do is to put new money into exploiting a depleted resource more quickly. And that is a fantastically unuseful way of using a debt swap for two reasons. A, you don't get the fiscal uplift which you should have from the investment. And secondly, by not doing what you say you are going to do, you actually undermine the economic resilience of the country and you increase its risk. Both are things which you don't want to use a debt swap for. Debt swaps are one tool in a much broader range of debt instruments that can be used, both for debt restructuring, debt forgiveness, debt reshaping, but also for new debt that's being issued. And as I was trying to say in the speech, the last thing we'd like to know, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to say today, is the key thing is to ensure that as we do these things, the triggers, the KPIs, the key performance indicators that you have in the debt swap for forestry, blue economy, renewable energy, are those, A, they are consistent with the broader national NDC, climate change, biodiversity policies. They are monitored appropriately, but also they then link into what the rating agencies, what the regulators want to do. Then you have this virtuous circle. And then the debt swap becomes very useful because it becomes a trigger for investment and new employment. And every Minister of Finance I've spoken to in the last 20 years, which I'm afraid is a lot, you talk about debt, and the first question is, how many more jobs is this going to create? And if the answer is, I don't know, probably some, that's not the answer which is going to get this done. So the key question to every debt restructuring conversation is economic increase, increase in employment, increase in resilience. And if one can answer those questions with those answers, then we have success. Thank you very much, Nicholas, for your question. And ladies and gentlemen, you'll be delighted to know.
Just
please.
one point. I want to add one thing. It's really, really interesting what you said, because it's not a matter of environment or climate. It's a matter of development. So if we do not change the development path, we will not only will have the climate or environment, but all the other positive externalities on social inequality and things like this. That's why it's not just a climate agenda, it's a development agenda.
I quite agree. And I used to be, for my sins, at the World Bank, and probably before most of you were born, which is rather depressing. But when I was doing that, there was a chief economist there who said to me, the great thing to remember, Justin, is that the environment is not a function of development. Development is a function of the environment. And once we have grasped that dialectic, then we can put together the integrated responses that we need. So, ladies and gentlemen, well done. You have survived. Thank you so much for your attendance. Thank you, my dear panelists. Diego, thank you so much. Nabil, thank you.
Gracias.